Hello and welcome, people who are listening to this podcast or watching it online or whatever you're doing. This is the very first episode of this podcast. I'm calling it Wicked History because that feels appropriate. And it is a Maine public history podcast. I am the host. I am Dana Ricker. Hi, hello. And today I am joined by the amazing
Antonella.
Hi.
Hi.
Um, for anyone listening, this is the first time that Antonella and I are ever actually like speaking in person, but this is going to be such a great episode. I'm so stoked for it. Okay, so this podcast, what is it? Why are we doing it? It's pretty much, for me personally, it's serving as my final project for my public history master's, or my master's in history, and we were basically told for this assignment that we had to create anything public history related, and we had to have people interact with it, and it should be something that we were like roughly passionate about. And I'm living in Maine. I'm new to Maine. I've never lived here before. My husband's from Maine, and so I figured I just kind of wanted to learn more about Maine, and there's no better people to teach me more about Maine than people who work in museums in Maine. So that's kind of the goal that we're trying to do here. These episodes are going to discuss Maine's history and the people who have lived here, and also discussing aspects of public history while we're doing it. So it's going to be good. This first episode, we are talking about visitor services and community interaction, arguably like the most important part of public history. And there's also no better place to start talking about history of Maine than talking also about the people whose land we are currently on, which is the Wabanaki. So, to tell everyone so much better than I could possibly dream of telling it, we've got Antonella here, and she works at the, well, actually, I'm going to have you go ahead and just talk a little bit about where you work, what you do, and also how did you even get started doing all of this?
I'm the manager of visitor services at the Abbe Museum. And in grad school, my first semester was during the fall of 2020. So the
Ooh,
pandemic was
yeah.
still at its height. And Cinnamon, who was the previous CEO, I think two times over now, she came and virtually spoke to my class, and she talked about the Abbe Museum and the work that the Abbe has been doing. And I knew when I went into, like, when I got my undergrad degree in history, that I wanted to work in a museum. And the work that I wanted to do, it was important to me that it was inclusive. And so hearing about the Abbey and the way the Abbey works with a decolonizing lens
Mm.
was really important to me. And so from then on, I was like, I will end up at the Abbey at some point in my life, maybe 10 years into my career. But then my last semester of grad school, I'm applying to jobs. And so I applied, a job opening came up with the Abbey in March. And I interviewed and I got the job in April. And then a week after graduation in May, I moved out here.
So that was a
So
lot quicker than you had expected.
yeah,
So
well,
you,
and I'm grateful. I
yeah.
mean, I think everything happens for a reason. It just, the timing was just incredible.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. Especially because I feel like people, when they first get out of grad school with a degree in history, they're always like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And you just got it right away.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, so you had talked about how important it was for you to look at like the history with Native American colonization and through a decolonization lens. Now, with the Wabanaki specifically, I'm sure that there are going to be people who are listening, even just like family members of mine, who have zero idea what the Wabanaki people are, makes up this group. So, for those who have no idea, would you mind just doing like a brief little overview of kind of like what the Wabanaki Confederacy is and the different nations that fall under that title?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Wabanaki Nations consists of the four federally recognized tribes of what is now known as Maine. And so the Micmac Nation, the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians, the Passamaquoddy tribes of Mudokmuduk and Zimbayak, and the Penobscot Nation. And they're known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland.
Oh, okay. Yeah, awesome. I know. So I obviously I'm a teacher, middle school teacher, and we talk about the Wabanaki extensively with my eighth graders. And so that was something that I know was, oh, and they get very into it too. They love talking about it. And I know that was something that I don't think had realized before. Like they've heard the names like Penobscot and they've heard the names Maliseet, but I don't think they realize that like Wabanaki's the umbrella and then there's all of these individual nations right in between. Do you feel like there is some like cultural aspects that define the Wabanaki people specifically versus like other native nations, even just like in the area?
So each tribal nation has its own government and like community schools, cultural centers, and each manages its respective lands and natural resources. And so, although most of Maine's native people like belong to one of these four federally recognized groups and reside on tribal lands, there are other native peoples who live in towns and cities across the state.
Mm,
Um, but I think it's also really important to kind of take some time to talk about tribal sovereignty
mm,
because despite being sovereign nations and having their own tribal governments, the Wabanaki Nations are excluded and denied rights and protections that are guaranteed by the federal Indian law due to the state of Maine's legislation, which was passed in 1980. And so this has resulted in like decades of social and economic barriers for the Wabanaki people and surrounding communities.
wow.
And so there are over 570 federally recognized Native nations in the U.S. And the Wabanaki Nations are the only federally recognized ones excluded from these rights and protections. Um,
Really?
yeah, and I also, if it would help, I can also kind of go into what tribal sovereignty is.
Please do. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So tribal sovereignty is it's the inherent right of tribes to govern themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
that has existed like centuries before any contact with outsiders, and it's recognized in the United States Constitution. The Abbe Museum actually recently published a sovereignty guide for allies, and I think it's a very useful resource to learn more about tribal sovereignty and why removing legal barriers to their economic opportunity and self-determination is a it's a win for like everybody
Yeah.
who live, visit, and work in what is now known as Maine. So it's really unfortunate, but I would like to think that with the work that we're doing, we can hopefully make a positive impact on the people who are visiting so they can really understand tribal sovereignty and what the state of Maine's legislation has been doing for decades and using that knowledge to like pressure um legislative the legislator to do the right
Yeah,
thing.
no, absolutely. I feel like that's also super important because a lot of people considering native nations that they're currently like living on or living near, it's a very like, oh, that happened in the past kind of a thing. Like, oh, thank God we don't do that anymore. Like, that was so bad way back then. But it's like a really good reminder that this is still happening and it is still actively affecting people who are native, who are not native, or any people living in the what is now known as the United States, because that's the whole land. Wow, yeah, no, that's I actually very much that was not on my notes, but I so appreciate you bringing that up. And then I will, for people who are listening who would like to know more about that with the Abbe Museum and what tribal sovereignty is, I will put links for that in the descriptions on. I'm posting this on Instagram, on Spotify. We will figure it out. If you are listening to this, you will find links to it. I promise. No, thank you. So I grew up. There was a nation about maybe 20 minutes south of my high school, and it was the Lower Sioux Native American Reservation. And I remember like growing up with kids, we would play sports against each other and things like that. And so it definitely does hit close to home thinking all of the ways in which we are still so far behind. Um,
Absolutely.
so thinking about all the work that the Abbe Museum does trying to right all of these wrongs, could you share just kind of like a brief history of the Abbe Museum and how its like overall mission and goals are preserving and promoting Wabanaki heritage?
Absolutely. So the Abbey Museum, actually, it started in Acadia National Park, our original location, Sur de Mont, was founded in 1926 and it opened to the public in 1928.
Mm.
Sorry. And so the Abbey Museum is named after its founder, Dr. Robert Abbey. And what the Abbey Museum, who we are, so or at least what we have, most importantly, we hold the largest and best documented collection of Maine Indian basketry.
Mm.
And we also acquired an extensive contemporary collection documenting Maine's continuing Wabanaki craft tradition. And so our collections now represent 12,000 years of Native American culture and history
Wow.
in Maine. And our conservation program has been recognized nationally as a model for museums. And for me, this is also one of the things that brought me to the museum.
Yeah.
So the mission and goals of the museum have changed significantly since its conception. We have worked closely with the Wabanaki Nations since the 1980s, but since 2014, with the creation of the Abbey's interpretation framework, which led to the 2015 strategic plan, the focus shifted to a more decolonizing lens,
Mm.
culminating in our 2016 permanent exhibit, People of the First Light. And so by sharing authority for the documentation and interpretation of Native culture, we collaborate and partner with the Wabanaki Nations in everything we do, exhibits, programming, our mission, our values, education. We have a board of trustees with both Wabanaki and non-Wabanaki people,
Mm.
and we also have a Wabanaki council, which contains up to 2 members of each Wabanaki tribal nation, whom each tribal chief appoints. And the Wabanaki Council guides our staff with interpretation.
So you guys are very much community interaction and outreach is pretty like that is the basis, is what I'm
Yes,
hearing. I
yeah,
mean, I'm and in theory that's how you speak of the Abbey Museum being like the model museum that's been recognized. And that is when you think about it, that is how it should be of you are serving the community, you are interpreting the community. You should be as interacting with the community as much as possible. Do you think you could, as your role as manager of visitor services, do you think you could speak to that a little more of how you try and ensure, like, when people come to visit, if they are Wabanaki, if they aren't Wabanaki, how do you try and enhance that, like, positive visit and try and also keep in mind all of the things that are so important about what the Abbey Museum's goals are?
absolutely. So, generally speaking, museums have historically controlled their audience's understanding of Native people,
Mm.
sovereignty, and culture by leaving Native people and communities out of the planning and process
Yeah.
of museum practices.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, um, there was or is little to no consultation and collaboration with Native people on exhibits, archaeology, culture, history, fashion, food, place names, education, and more. And while this practice is now evolving, I think across the museum field, I think the museum field has a long road to travel to right past inequities and plan for a more collaborating present and future. And so the principles of decolonization inform how the Abbey builds, understands, and exhibits its collections, and they affect like who shapes and tells the stories in our galleries and programs. And so decolonization is part of our governance policy and practice, training all staff, and even determining, what is sold in the museum shops, which is under my
Oh, I
purview
suppose.
responsibility.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, most of our shop features and sells items by Wabanaki artists and authors.
Yeah.
And we also feature other Indigenous artists, and everything in our shop except for one item is made, authored, or edited by Indigenous artists and authors. So we really, it's important that what we're doing in the shop reflects our work. And then kind of going into the second part of your question,
Yeah.
one of my main roles is ensuring visitors understand the importance of decolonization and how using that principle is critical to our work and why. and that it's an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm.
Because in general, you can't really be like, oh yeah, this is decolonized, we're all done now, check.
Yeah.
The process of decolonization is never ending, and it's, constantly evolving, and it's ongoing.
Yeah.
You always have to be working at it because we live in a system that is literally built on colonization.
Yeah.
Everything, everything from, capitalism to our government structure, just
Mm-hmm.
everything. So my job is to help visitors push through any discomfort and or prejudices that they might have or feel until and so they can learn and see firsthand perspectives from Wabanaki community members and why
Yeah.
it's so important. And it's to me, I think it's really important for visitors to truly learn about the Wabanaki Nations and from Wabanaki people
Yeah.
because they are still very much alive and still fighting for sovereignty and recognition from the state of Maine.
Do you
So
find that visitors have a lot of like, you say like living in that uncomfortable feeling and, confronting those difficult histories? Do you find that they have like a lot of pushback, or are they normally pretty like receptive into being like, I recognize I didn't know this before, but I'm ready to learn about it now?
I think most visitors have that sense,
Mm-hmm.
but of course, we still see a lot of people
Sure.
who are kind of stuck in their ways.
Yeah.
And so that I think is one of the most difficult parts of my job because obviously when people are receptive to learning more and growing as humans,
Mm.
like those are arguably the easier group to be able to like build a
Yeah.
foundation and teach. But when you have people who don't want to listen or feel as though nothing can be done,
Mm.
that's when it gets more complicated and difficult to kind of
Yeah.
get them out of that mindset and break that down and show them why it's so
Yeah.
important, you know.
And I'm sure Mainers too are very, they're a different group of people. Mainers are very proud of the fact that they are from Maine. And so I'm sure to be told like, yes, you were born here, but this is not the spot that your people are from, kind of a thing. I'm sure they're probably pretty like confrontational with that.
Actually, so our downtown location is located in Bar Harbor.
Yeah.
Bar Harbor it caters to tourists.
Oh.
So we are open to the public from May to October.
Mm-hmm.
And our primary like visitor demographic are tourists coming from out of state, worldwide. A lot of cruise ship visitors, a lot of like car visitors
Yeah.
driving in
Sure, sure.
for the day or weekend, but we primarily see tourists. So
Okay.
that's another part of our outreach. So because of the law mandated for schools to teach Wabanaki history,
Right.
um, our curator of education does work with schools to, she gives programs and group tours and everything. And we have an educator hub on our website with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different resources. Um, so we do thankfully get to interact with school groups, but the people that we mostly see are tourists.
No, that makes total sense. And I knew that the Abbey Museum was in Bar Harbor, but again, not a native Mainer, so that I didn't quite make that connection, but that makes total sense. Absolutely. And you had kind of talked about like the biggest challenges that you had about having those people like sit in that kind of uncomfy history. Do you feel like there's any other challenges that you experience in your role, with visitor engagement, and community engagement? And then how do you go about kind of like addressing those?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest challenges that I kind of face from a visitor services perspective is how to keep the engagement of visitors
Mm.
throughout the visit and after their visit. Because Bar Harbor caters to primarily to tourists, and most of our visitors are tourists from various places, it's kind of explaining who we are and what our museum represents is really important because we have very limited time with these visitors.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, and like addressing these challenges, it varies because well, since the start of COVID-19, and various like staff structuring, and we're still kind of building up our capacity regarding like programming and education and workshops and events and stuff. So kind of coming from a visitor services perspective, elements that I've kind of brought back or have built upon include having a touch table, which is has hands-on activities for visitors to kind of see baskets and learn more about some tools, and then activities and programming. I think really help ensure visitors are engaged when kind of going through the museum.
Mm.
And then we have resources and other things like the Allies Guide to keep them engaged after their visit.
I'm so glad you brought that up because as a teacher, engagement and trying to keep people engaged is the forefront of my head like
Yep.
90% of my day. So and it's such a struggle. Even people that want to go to a museum and they're like, yes, they're excited to go. Once you go through that door, it's like you have to be able to make sure that they've maintained that engagement or else nothing's going to stick. Yeah.
Yep.
So my next little question, little blip. Any memorable stories or projects where you have interacted with the community? Are there any that like kind of stick out in your head? I'm sure you probably have a ton. But any that you felt like were really kind of like this is why the Abbe Museum is here. This is what we were meant to do. Like this is proving it's working.
So one of the most memorable projects that I've been a part of was being a big part in planning the 22nd annual Wabanaki Student Art Show. And so the Wabanaki Student Art Show, to kind of briefly explain it,
Yeah.
and the Abbe Museum in partnership with Maine Indian Education, RSU 29 Holton, the Boys and Girls Club of Border Towns, and the Boys and Girls Club of Presque Isle, we're proud to showcase talented young Wabanaki artists from pre-K all the way to grade 12. All of these organizations are devoted to promoting art education and celebrating Wabanaki culture. And so the featured student artists are from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Medokmeduk, which is Indian Township, Zimbayak, which is Pleasant Point, the Penobscot Nation, and the Micmac Nation, and then also the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians. And so we encourage creative expression by investing in the next generation of thinkers and dreamers and doers. And so the work featured in this exhibit showcases each youth student's unique perspective, culture, and identity. And it's seriously one of the most beautiful things that I've ever been a part of. So,
Oh, I can believe it. That sounds beautiful just sitting here listening to it. I think also just I think really speaks to like the Abbe Museum and like you are interpreting the community and the history as much as you're like giving back to the community and history. And I think that that's also a really good model to follow of that was one of the things. Oh my gosh, I could pull my textbook right now and just show you the things that we were talking about. But one of the things that was talked about with visitor engagement and visitor studies was if you have say a historic house that's just sitting in the neighborhood, people aren't going to come unless they are showcasing local art, unless they are saying, hey, here is a way that we can give back to the community, and also this is what we do too. And it's kind of like a fluid relationship, and it's there to service each other. And that sounds so lovely. Oh my gosh.
it's seriously, it's beautiful. I mean, these students, I don't have even an ounce of talent that they have. I mean, I even
Kids are so good at art, aren't they?
it's insane. I mean, and I will say, the current show, or yeah, the
Yeah.
most recent show that's up, you can actually view it on our website,
Oh,
under exhibits.
yeah.
So I can send you that link
Please
too.
do. There's gonna be a whole bunch
Seriously,
of links under this thing. It would be great.
beautiful artwork.
Oh my gosh,
Absolutely.
that's wonderful. I'm sure that they're probably feeling like I'm like an artist, like I'm like at an exhibit, like this is cool.
No, the I we host a reception for them, a private
Yeah.
reception, so they can see their artwork. And hearing the students, their comments like, my art is in a museum, and like sharing that with their family and
Yeah.
friends is so like surreal and heartwarming. I growing up, I loved museums,
Mm.
and I think that by adding and really investing in the community is so important.
Yeah.
And that we're able, alongside these amazing groups and organizations or and schools, to provide this opportunity for these students and for them to showcase their, their culture, their identity is just beautiful.
I mean, and two, it's like, you and I are a couple of history nerds. And so museums when we were
Yeah.
kids are fun places. But that's not the case for so many kids, mainly my students. I'm definitely calling them out. But I think, too, it's like showing that museums aren't just stuffy places where there's books and you have to sit and be quiet and read the thing on the wall and then move on. But it's something that you can see yourself in, and it's something that you can be a part of as much as you can be in it. Like it's not something that you just have to sit in and you can't touch, but it's like it's the same thing of it's fluid, it's able to be interacted with. I mean, that's beautiful. It's just such like a cute little metaphor. I love that.
I
I
love
love it.
that.
Okay, my last little bit, honestly, this has gone by so fast. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
But anything that you can think of that's like upcoming, or projects or initiatives that you're like particularly excited about, I would love to hear anything that you want to just like promote to say, hey, this is going to happen.
yeah. So, of course, I'm excited about the 23rd annual Wabanaki Student Show.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to seeing the amazing work from these students. So, I'm really excited for next year for that.
Hmm.
And then, right now we're in the process of planning, strategic planning. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how that will help shape how we're going to move forward, regarding like many aspects within the museum, but especially visitor services.
Hmm.
So I'm excited about that. And I guess I'm just also looking forward to, more programming and events happening soon, including the revisioning of the Abbey Museum Indian Market,
Mm.
and just continuing to work alongside the Wabanaki community. So
Do you want to explain the Abbey Museum Indian Market? Was that the gift shop that you were mentioning, or did you want to talk about that a little bit?
I can touch on it's called the Abbey Museum Indian Market, or AMIM.
Okay.
And so what AMIM is we invite artists to showcase their work,
Hmm.
both Wabanaki artists and also just Indigenous artists from the United States, what is now known as the United States. And it's a place for them to, showcase the like jewelry, baskets, anything that clothing, and give them the opportunity to talk about it, but also they're able to sell their work. And then we also can incorporate factors where people can vote on like different things regarding like best piece, stuff like that. So I guess it's just an opportunity for like bringing communities together
Yeah.
and really showcasing the amazing work that Indigenous people are create.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. I love that. I do. I just love all the examples of like the giving back to the community, and it's just like it's kind of I almost just like forget that that's a thing that museums can do and should do, and it's just yeah. I love hearing about it. Um
hmm.
okay, Antonella, those are all the questions I have. I felt like I came up with so many questions and we just flew through them so quickly. This went so fast, which is good. That's a good sign.
I love that for us.
We're doing great. Is
Yeah.
there is there anything else that you wanted to touch on from your perspective, from the Abbey Museum perspective, or anything? Just closing thoughts.
I guess closing thoughts is, I hope people listening take the time to learn more about the work that we do, and visit our website and attend programs and events, and even visit if they can, and also kind of take what you've maybe learned through this podcast, um and be true allies
Mm.
and learn more about how you can amplify Indigenous voices and, be supportive and inclusive. So,
Those were I can't I was thinking about saying closing words and I can't top that, so that's perfect. Those were my words.
sorry.
No, that's good. Hey, this is your show. Okay, well, I mean, that's all I have. Thank you for being here, Antonella. Seriously, I do appreciate it so much. You were wonderful. Thank you to anyone who's listening. There will be more episodes, so if you're listening, please be sure to listen to those as well. And that's all I have. So thank you guys so much, and you will hear my voice hopefully later on.